In this podcast, I'm joined by JJ Ducart and Donnie Monroe up from Kansas. Donnie's a big buck killer with multiple 200 inchers under his belt. We break down his iconic hunt for a buck he calls Pinhead, a 209-inch giant with a 9 3/4-inch drop tine, and then a 230 early season buck. We talk about early season trail camera strategy, mock scrapes, and hunting over a decoy. Hot topic question, buck decoy or doe decoy? Enjoy.
The Deer Society podcast is brought to you by Illusion Hunting Systems, Onyx Hunt, Reveal Cellular Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Prime Archery, G5 Broadheads, Osseo Gear, Raw Frozen Scents, and HHA.
Well, Donnie, welcome to the podcast, man. Thanks for joining us in the Deer Society studio.
Man, I'm glad to be here. This is an amazing place and amazing people, and yeah, I'm pumped.
We were just talking here before we started that, you know, it's getting to be that time of year. It's kind of end of July, beginning of August, and you were saying on your drive up from Kansas that you're starting to get that itch.
Yes, especially when I roll in here and I see all these big deer on the wall, and yeah, it's getting me fired up, and JJ and I just keep talking about getting out and different bucks, and yeah, and then kind of going through some of the shoots and stuff and reiterating and thinking about, you know, memories and hunts in the past. And yeah, it's awesome.
Well, you are no stranger to big bucks and, you know, being up in the studio before these podcasts, did some hunt breakdowns with you, some giant deer. Obviously an iconic one, Pinhead, a 209-inch drop tine giant, you know, so unique. I think, you know, when we think of big deer, or at least when I think of big deer and pictures like that, the pictures of that buck and just the image of him is just really, it's so iconic. He's so special. We got to break down that hunt. That'll be a hunt breakdown coming this fall. And then your wife, Sherry, an epic hunt. Man, some of the coolest imagery, that we've seen on video in a long time, just the way that buck acts. So maybe just like give people, we can kind of give people a little taste of what those hunt breakdowns might look like to start with. So maybe just introduce for those of you that haven't seen this deer, Pinhead, maybe just do a 30,000 foot overview on that buck.
Yeah. So this is, Pinhead was, the whole process, you know, was amazing. We purchased our own land. First year I'd seen him, you know, he was a 3-year-old buck and he had a lot of character, and I just knew this deer was going to be special. And, you know, the following year passed him, you know, he's probably 175 inches, had a 5-inch drop tine on his right side. And then, you know, being risky and, you know, trying to let him walk and doing everything I could, you know, with food plots and supplemental feeding and, you know, cover and, you know, moving in and planting, you know, cedars and just doing everything I could to make that more attractive. But at the same token, when I wasn't in there doing that, backing off and, you know, creating a safe place where, you know, I wasn't having a lot of pressure. So he wanted to stay there. And then to be able to actually not only hunt him and see him as a 5-year-old, that was just an incredible frame. Kickers, stickers, 9 1/4-inch drop tine that actually switched from his right side to his left side. I mean, just unbelievable. And then to be able to capitalize on that and kill him with, you know, my bow and self-film that, you know, it's very few people, I think, have actually been able to self-film a 200-inch plus, and then especially on your own property, you know. So it was incredibly special, and, you know, having my family out there, moving them from Indiana to Kansas, and, you know, it's just kind of a dream come true. And kind of like we talked earlier, you know, I mean, to be able to do that with that size of buck, shooting any buck that's over 200 inches is kind of like winning the Super Bowl, you know, and from a deer hunter's perspective. And you know, the only thing that I've got missing is I didn't go to Disneyland afterwards. But yeah, it was really incredible.
Yeah, and those hunts that that's an iconic buck, like Brian said, just a massive frame drop tie, and I can just still picture the first time I saw the video, the trail camera footage of that deer walking through that green field hitting the scrape, just sticks in my mind with that visual memory. But the two hunts we broke down, not only a giant 200-incher, but a buck that was just gnarly 8-year-old ground level. What do we say? It's one of the most graphic hunts that somebody could ever probably see. So there's a little teaser into that one, but just watching that footage the last couple days, kind of taking notes, getting ready for Donnie to be in here for hunt breakdowns, like it just giving us a little bit of this, shiver the chills, like getting ready for season, those November hunts, cold mornings or evenings, and just gets you pumped. I mean, it's July now, but it's right around the corner.
Yeah, not only was that graphic, but just what an intense hunt with, the decoy and the buck coming in and being able to call him in, and having him work a scrape right in front of us. And, you just saw dirt just flying and, it just the way he was posturing. And, for me as a seasoned hunter, it was incredible. And then to lay all that down and capture that, but then to share that with your wife, and she's never been able to hunt, a buck that was 8.5 years old. And, for her to experience that, it was incredible. I mean, she was pumped and I was pumped, and it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's what hunting's all about too, is sharing those experiences with people, and whether it's friends or family or whatever, it makes it that much more special. We talk about the camaraderie and things involved, and I've done films where we talk about how hunting has molded me as a person, and those are, you look back at those things, like in your hunt breakdown, you even teared up like that. Those things are so special, and hunting is such a important, special, passionate thing that we get to experience, which is cool. I wanna dive into some strategy here with you. I know that one of the big things that we talked about today and some of these hunts and some things that you do are, your setups on the front end. So I want to talk about, how you set up some of these spots and how you use mock scrapes. And in Kansas, you hunt a lot of open ground, right? So you do some things to, get the deer in front of you. So I just want to talk about kind of how you set up some of your spots, what that looks like, how you use mock scrapes to your advantage, and just kind of your approach maybe this time of year as we approach the fall, what you're doing to get some of those spots ready.
So yeah, what I try to do is, I'll plant some spring plots, things to try to keep the deer in the area. I'll have mineral sites out. I'll do supplemental feeding, anything that I can do to try to pull those deer in and get them using that area. And then as summer kind of comes to an end, I'll start making mock scrapes. And what I'll use is, scents to basically pull them in and try to create a social networking area where these bucks want to come in, and they want to not only come in for the food option, but they also want to leave their scent. They want to start, as they start to become more hard-horned, and they want to establish their dominance and kind of where they're at in the hierarchy, and let everybody know they're there. And, I utilize mock scrapes and try to put them in situations where they're, 20 yards from my stand. So that way I'm drawing those deer in and gives me a shot opportunity. Same thing with putting food plots in. If I can put a food plot in, anything I can do to try to maneuver those deer to where they can come within range. Because even if whether it's really open or, I have some cover, no matter what, I'm looking at how can I slip in and slip out without being detected. Utilizing everything I can for different, I'll set up different Novik stands for different wind locations, even on the same plot. So I have, if the temperature drops and man, I feel like they're going to be on their feet, I might have different stands that I want to go to and I want to be in there. And if you just dedicate yourself to one, it's really tough in that scenario. And then, I always have stands ready to do a hang and hunt. But personally, I don't like to do that as much because especially when you're self-filming, you want to have lanes, you want to have things open. So I go in early, and in an area, I'll trim out, I'll get stands located for different wind directions, and I'll, get everything situated. So that way, when I go in to hunt, I go in to kill, not hunt. I go in for that. If I feel like my opportunity is good, I'm slipping in there, and I want to do everything I can to be undetected with my scent. I use phase to wash with. I use raw calming scent, to help mask my odor, whatever's left of it. And then I use ozonics to have my backside, or if the wind switches, or even if I have questionable winds, which we talked about that on the breakdowns, of sometimes on those, you give the wind to his advantage and you're kind of skirting that edge, it can utilize to where, capitalize and, be able to kill him. So you got to just kind of consider all that stuff, and it's all about, and the reason I guess I like to do that and also put up multiple stands because I want minimal impact. And when I go in, if I don't kill him the first time, I want to kill him as soon as I can. And I don't want to keep going in and in and in, and I want to try to be as stealthy as possible, slipping in, slipping out. And I use a quiet cat a lot, because I'm not laying down any scent. I can slip in really fast. And, with filming, when, let's say towards the evening of a hunt, if I'm not able to kill him, then I don't think it's going to happen. And the coast is clear, I try to get down as fast as possible and slip out of there. Or, if I've got deer that are in there, I wait till they're out of there and then I slip out, but it's all about impact, and also in, areas that's more open is trying to pull those deer in to where you want them, to where, you can capitalize and kill them with a bow.
Yeah, I like what you said there about, trying to get out, because sometimes, there's maybe 10, 15 minutes left of light, and there's a chance that your shooter buck could show up and you might get a shot, low light footage, but sometimes it's better off to just say, kind of cut your ties, cut your losses, get out, give yourself a fresh sit the next time instead of trying to, maybe there's does walking in, they're 100 yards out. If you can just try to get down, get out quick, that's huge.
I do that. Yeah. And I agree, because it's one of those things where if it's getting 15 minutes and things aren't right and you're not seeing any action, it's not that it couldn't happen, but you're talking about, okay, first of all, you got to see him, then he's got to come in and he's got to get it within range and make the shot. And it's the chance of all that coming together that quick can be pretty tough, And I think a lot of it too is confidence level. If you know that a deer's been showing up late, but yet still within time, then maybe you make the decision to stay longer. But it's kind of one of those, you got to feel it, you know what I mean? And maybe experience plays into that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you were talking about using scrapes earlier and trying to get deer, within range. Well, even another element to that when you're self-filming like we do is getting deer in front of you. So, if you're hunting without a camera, maybe you can shoot a deer over your shoulder 20 yards away. Not a problem. You're not trying to capture on film anyway, but if you got a filming setup, and I don't know how your stands are in the types of trees and terrain, but for the most part, it seems like you got about a 180, range that you need to have that deer in to get it on film and shoot and have them not downwind and all that stuff too. So
I agree 100%. And it kind of takes me back to even think about ground blinds. Like, I get, if you're a rifle hunter and having 360 and you can probably get away with more, but I've seen deer pick you up at 300 or 400 yards before. So to me, if I was going to design a ground blind, I wouldn't even have anything but maybe some little short windows to peek through in the back, but all my action's in the front, and that's where I'm anticipating everything going down. So I would save cost and not put windows in the back and put more wide windows in the front, so you have better shooting opportunities, especially with video, being able to pan the camera. And if you got somebody side by side with you, it gives you more opportunity for them to be able to make the shot and you capture it on film.
It's interesting. I have the opportunity to film a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and hunting experiences. And you can always tell like the ones that have self-filmed or filmed or never filmed. And like, there's sometimes like as a self filmer or a camera guy filming somebody else, like you have your shooting lanes, right? And like we're talking about, and you have your shots right out in front of you, and that's where you want the deer. And you go, I think you learn to go, and maybe it's it's an added benefit as a hunter. You learn to go the extra mile and put those details in, right? Like, and we could talk about how you set up your mock scrapes, right? Because I want to touch on that. But that's where you want the deer. But you get in the tree stand with a guy who's never filmed or never self-filmed, and it's like, I can just picture it. He gets up there and he's got his bow in his hand, right? And he's like, oh, okay, I can shoot here and I can shoot here and I can shoot upside down 360 degrees behind me. And I'm, as a camera guy, that's your worst nightmare. You're like, man, that's the last thing I want to hear. Like, we want the deer out here and this is where we want them. But, it makes you think as a hunter, like putting in those extra levels of detail to really try to get those deer where you want them. It helps understanding from that filming standpoint too. So, I know we talked about like your mock scrapes and you want to put them, in that kind of 20-yard range where you can shoot them. I know that you use some scrape sticks and some other things, and you talked a little bit earlier about how you orient those, because you want deer to approach them certain ways. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like on a scrape stick, the reason I like those, you can position them where you want them. So, I mean, like for instance, on Sherry's buck, now where she killed, we used a decoy, and even on a decoy, like I try to put it out there 18 to 20 yards approximately to give enough room to where, they can come between us to get downwind, but I also have them like slightly quartering to me because in my experience, most of the time, they try to come at its head. So they tend to hook around, which gives you an opportunity for a broadside or a quartering away shot. Or, if they're out there a little farther, they're still within 30 yards or so if they hang up a little bit. But as far as like even the mock scrape on the other side that, if we'd had the right wind, there's a mock scrape there that I use as kind of a community scrape. And it's a big open alfalfa field, and I place that in the center of it, and I make a mock scrape that's a very foreign object, but it has a limb that I cut off of a tree that I, generally like an oak tree or something like that, but I face it towards me about 20 yards away. And man, I'm telling you, I've done this enough that the majority of the bucks in that area will hit that. I promise you. And that gives an opportunity, especially on a big open alfalfa field like that. Even if, you're not running a decoy, maybe because you don't want to wear it out, or if you don't spook all the does that are coming in. So you have that out there, which is another key piece to help bring them within range, of a blind or your no-weak stand or whatever,
Yeah, and as you're talking, I was thinking about, what are the advantages of decoy versus that, you had the scrape stick. Obviously, decoy, we talked about more of a high-risk situation, but during the rut, invokes that emotion. Benefit to that, you can call, communicate. They see something, they see a deer, they're going to react to that. Scrape is more of like a low-key. You're not going to call, they're not going to see a deer over there. And it's more of a natural thing. It's not going to spook does. So there's kind of a plus minus on both sides. Which one do you think, if you had to choose one, which one are you going with? That scrape situation or that decoy for the visual?
I would say probably the decoy because I don't hunt as much. Only because the fact that, if he's out at a distance, even if it's pre-rut, late October, where they're starting to get callable, if you got him and he pops out and he's 100 yards away, there's a good chance if you've got that decoy, you can call him in. If you've got that scrape, he might eventually come to it, but you can do some blind calling and maybe a little bit just entice him to come over, and it could work. And it has worked in the past, but it's not going to be the same and probably won't come as quick as if he sees a decoy over there. And you can have the scrape stick and the decoy. I've hunted that, or a tree that has, branches on it, and, you can make a mock scrape, but that combination works good too. So, but if I had one, especially late October into November, I would say probably decoy. But at the same token, when I say that, I don't hunt with a decoy all the time either. So it's, if I can catch them on their natural transition, or if I can pull them into, a food plot, or, having a scrape, I try to do that first and foremost, only because when you put a decoy, you got to go out and get it. You got to set it up, and, it has its own disadvantages too. So you kind of got to weigh it out, and I just try to feel it. Like, what am I feeling? Like, do I feel confident that this buck's going to come through there? If not, and I feel like I might see him, but maybe at a distance, then I might take the decoy so I can try to close that gap quick. Because if I'm going to try to close the gap, I'm not going to call him if I don't think he's going to be here in daylight where I can shoot him and capture it on film. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to call him over and then it's too dark, and now I'm sitting here and I got a decoy and he's looking at it like, what's going on? Because to fool him once is good, but to try to fool him twice, it could still happen, but every time your chances go down.
Yeah, so we just did that hunt breakdown on Sherry's buck. Obviously, you can see that emotion that her buck had coming in the decoy, just ears pinned, hair bristled, making a scrape. Just incredible footage. What do you do so if she would not have shot the deer and that buck, showed up on that plot that evening? What would your plan have been to get out? Because that's one of the big things about decoys, like, how do you go grab it then if deer out feeding there? What's your plan? Do you got a strategy? Do you ever just leave it up? Let some buck blast it at night and come back, pick up the pieces, or what?
It'll be a mess. Man, I don't ever leave them out. But what I will do is I will wait till it's dark as much as possible. Because I don't know about you guys, but I mean, when it's dark, they can't see as far either. It cuts down on their visibility. So you can get away with going out. And I just try to wait until, because deer normally don't come to a, food source and just stay in one spot very long. They'll feed and then they'll generally transition on. So you just wait them out, wait till they move, and then slip in or slip out there, grab it, and get out of there. But definitely waiting till it's dead dark if you have to. If there's deer present that looks like they're not moving or moving far, like a big field, I'll wait till it's dark to move.
Do you know anything about how far deer can see when it's really dark? Scientific wise?
No, not really.
I noticed that too. I just don't know. Is it 25% is fine? I don't know.
I can tell you I've just tested it, and I've definitely seen that they cannot see as well. And even if there's a few does, I might wait a while and then slip out. And even if they kind of you notice something, they don't seem to be as spooked, or they're not sure what they saw. So, and years ago, a long time ago, of course, I'm getting old now, but I used to read a lot of books. I can tell you the gestation period of a whitetail doe, and I can't remember any of that stuff now, but I just know for a fact that when it gets dark, it's, of course, and that has to do with, is the moon out? Is it really bright? Are the clouds in the sky? But if it's dark, yeah, they have a hard time seeing you.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
On that decoy topic, I think one of the big questions that I get a lot, and I think guys ask if they're going to use a decoy, are you using a buck decoy or are you using a doe decoy, and why?
I've used both, and I've used both together. And personally, I use a buck decoy more so now than anything. Matter of fact, that's all I use anymore, really. And I guess the reason is that generally speaking, if you have, let's say, a doe decoy and there's bucks around, well, generally speaking, if there's other does, well, you're not really any competition. You're going to have a hard time pulling them off of the other does, or he may not come at all, If it's, say there's no does and you have a doe decoy, then yeah, there's a good chance. But there's also still a good chance that if I have a buck decoy, I'm going to call him in even if there's no other deer in the field, because I have an opportunity to test his patience by, grunting at him, snort wheezing, getting under his skin to make him say, okay, I've had enough, and come over whether it's to investigate or whether it's to try to plow him over, and so in my experience, I would definitely choose a buck decoy.
Gotcha. So you are a fan of using the buck decoy, and then, communication obviously in those circumstances plays a big role, kind of playing their emotions against them.
Yes. Yeah. And some of the keys, one is grunting, obviously, and being able to control the volume of the call. But also something that I've used for a long time, and I've killed a lot of deer with it, is, snort wheezing. That tends to really get under their skin. They hate that. Like, if you want to tick one off and really get them coming, learn how to snort wheeze. It's not hard to do. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it definitely gets their attention. Now, I don't mean just go out and just, get crazy with it, but it's definitely, it's a game closer,
In a situation where you're going to snort wheeze like that, is that something that you'll do alone, or is it more of a last resort kind of thing? Will you go with like a more of a calling grunting sequence before it and then follow with the snort wheeze? What does that typically look like for you?
I almost always grunt first before I snort wheeze, just to get their attention. But, there's, it kind of depends on how I'm reading the buck's, what his body posturing is doing, how's he responding. A lot of times if you just grunt at them, they'll look and won't do anything. But sometimes it's just a grunt and, they do come, and they're curious. But that combination of a grunt, get his attention, then snort wheeze at him, yeah, that generally, if it's the right time of year and he's starting to get his testosterone build up, he's going to react somehow. Not every time, but definitely happens a lot.
For sure.
But you're also potentially educating them too. So, you want to try to capitalize on that if you go down that road, or just a random grunt. Deer grunt all the time. They socialize all the time. Early season, if you just see a deer, if you grunt at it, I wouldn't snort wheeze early. I wouldn't snort wheeze until, towards the very end of October. But you can grunt at a deer to get their curiosity, or maybe want them to come check you out. You can do that any time of year.
One of the things that you talk a lot about, especially in the breakdowns we just did, is having a low pressure approach to the properties that you hunt, gathering a lot of intel. As we approach the season here, I'm sure that you have a bunch of trail cameras out. Obviously, we've seen some pictures. You got some really good deer that should make for an exciting fall. But talk to me about what your strategy is kind of this time of the year when it comes to placing those trail cameras, getting your intel system set up, so that you don't have to go into your property all the time to figure out what deer are doing.
Yeah, I try to get multiple cameras, and I don't have to just use the cameras. I enjoy the cameras because, I like to be in the woods just like anybody. I would go there and take a nap, every day if I could. It's just I love it. But the problem with that, the more you go in just messing around, the more pressure you're putting on those deer. And, you might get away with that with young deer and or does, whatever. But those mature bucks are a different animal, and they just don't tolerate, being messed with a whole lot. So, I'll use long distance observation, glass and beam fields. But even then, I don't do that a whole lot. I try to go when I feel like I can capture them and monitor them a few times. But I still even think with that, you got to be really careful unless you have the perfect scenario where you can slip in, slip out. But you got to think about every time you go in, are you potentially harming something? Are you messing something up? Because it does, the cause and effect situation plays part, and it can transition to fall and how you kill that deer. So I'll utilize, long distance observation. I'll put cameras at different areas. And if I'm not getting what I want, I'll move cameras around too, and I'll put multiple cameras up. I also, and a lot of cameras, people run them on just still images, just pictures. And I have been running cameras on video mode for a long time, and even text cams on video mode. And one, I like to see the videos. There's so many times when you get a still image and it would be a partial of a rack and you can't really tell what's going on, or some of it might be out of focus. With a video, your chance is really good of seeing exactly what that deer is. Who is it? What is it? Plus, I just like seeing them, and who doesn't like that? Throughout season, it just helps satisfy me. And then during season, it can even help give you intel. And, I'll put them on, parts of food plots. And if they're in video mode, I can kind of tell maybe where that deer came from. And then I can also move that camera a little bit and try to see, is he coming from where I think he's coming from, or is he doing something else? So it gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit too and utilize those as a tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you were talking about the two different methods of trail camera and also long distance spotting scopes, whatnot. What do you think is more, could hurt you more if a buck detects you, whether you're 100, 200 yards out and he sees you or smells you visually, or if you got that camera and you're putting it right on where he's coming out and he ends up smelling that camera, but he doesn't see you? Which one do you think could hurt you a little bit more?
So I'm originally from Indiana, and the bucks there are definitely a little different. They're a little more wary about everything. And I learned there, and they're just like people. Everybody has a different personality. Well, deer do too. And some you can get away with more than others. And, before I start really maneuvering it, I try to get a feel, like if I'm trying to pin down a deer, know what's going on. Like I want to see how's he reacting to it. And I utilize a lot of blackout or invisible cameras so it doesn't affect them. They don't have any noise. A lot of times I don't put them like right in their face on a trail camera. They might walk through or past it. But if I have a negative result on one where like the deer comes, stares at it, and then backs off or turns around and goes away, then I'll move it. And if I have a deer that's like that, I might take a Novik stick and put it on a tree and put the camera up high and at an angle so the camera is just not visible to them. But again, I'll use a blackout invisible flash, type camera. So it just kind of depends. Now in Kansas, I haven't found too many that are really sketchy on those, but I just try to set them up off the actual trail so I can kind of see and monitor, which gives you a little bit more intel because you can see better of where they come in instead of just being right on top of them. But it just varies,
What about as far as scent control? Are you letting your cameras air out before you put them out? Like sit them outside for 2-3 weeks, or washing them down? Or are you just going straight from the box to the field and just time in a rain, or just not worried about, especially this time of year when the moisture, it's higher humidity levels, and
so I mean, you probably
can stuff.
You can probably tell with me, like I keep most of mine out all year, so they're always scent free. But if I was, starting from scratch or just getting some out there, I'd probably just start them on the edge of food plots or, wherever in areas. But I really never found much of an issue like that. Now, if you're going into a buck's bedding area, now you're playing a different ball game, then you're potentially, and that's definitely completely blackout invisible camera. If I'm even getting remotely close, and it's going to have a solar panel, it's going to be up high, it's going to be in a situation where, and I don't ever like go right in their bedding area, but I'm saying if you're even getting close, like I want that thing where they don't see it, it's not detectable, and I won't even get close if I feel like they might be in there at the time, because I don't want to push them out,
Yeah.
But and another thing too is season approaches and it gets closer to fall. I'll put them on mock scrapes, and monitor them. And then when they start getting real scrapes, whether they're hitting my mock scrapes or maybe I find another scrape that's inside the timber or in a different area, but I can tell like everybody's using it and tearing it up. I'll generally put a scrape on or a camera on video mode on that because it's surprising, how many bucks you might pick up there that maybe you're not getting in other locations. So it just, you kind of got to just think outside the box on a little bit of everything.
It's amazing to me, like how I think or there's a lot of people that overlook scrapes or community areas like that, deer use them all year round. Like, and they use them differently now than they use them in late October, right? Or middle of October or November. But like my trail cameras now, I have some out and it's always interesting. Like there's a couple bucks that I'm watching and have an eye on. And then like one smaller buck will come in and hit a scrape, right? So I have some cameras on scrapes right now. And then it's like that same morning, boom, there's 5 or 6 bucks there. And then there might not be any bucks there for a couple of days, but like, it seems like, and especially like early in the mornings, there's a lot of moisture. Like if one buck comes in there and hits one of those scrapes, it's like, boom, 5, 6, like there's a bunch of bucks that all hit them together in those same mornings. And I really have been seeing that the last couple of weeks as I've been running trail cameras here throughout the summer.
Yeah. You get those bachelor groups and they're trying to establish dominance, even if they're all the same age, it's still that hierarchy, situation. And, they'll come in this time of year and they'll chew on it and leave their saliva and, rub their preorbital glands and, everything on them and basically just leaving their scent, but it all goes back to that. But then, as it gets into later in the year, then, they start working the ground, they start urinating in it. It gets, heavy pre-rut into rut, then they start really raking those trees and, trying to snap the branches. And so it definitely changes as time goes on. But right now they're generally just biting on it, leaving their saliva in their, their forehead gland and preorbital glands.
Speaking of that and how deer communicate and scents and things. So here in Minnesota, we are not able to use scents. Like we can't bait, can't use scents. I know that you use a lot of scents down in Kansas. So maybe talk me through how you use that. So I know you use a lot of raw. What does that scent strategy look like for scrapes and then when you're out there hunting too?
Yeah, so when I'm establishing a mock scrape, I'll use an actual preorbital gland lure, but I also use some raw frozen scents, and I use different stuff at different times of the year. But early on, I use like the multi-buck, and as it gets closer into season, I'll use some scrape lure. It's frozen. They bottle it and they ship it to you. I pull it out and I'll generally take one bottle and as I'll have multiple mock scrapes that I'll, be kind of doctoring up. And then once you kind of get them using it, then you don't have to do it as often. But then as it gets towards fall and late season or later in the season, I'll go from using even, scrape lure to even like their 30 plus estrus, and really ramping that up. And that just helps drive those bucks to come there even more, and that's the whole intent is, when it is season, you want a way to try to get those deer to come where you want them. And that's kind of one of those elements that, helps with that situation,
Absolutely. JJ, I know you do some hunting in some different states like Minnesota, Wisconsin. Obviously, you're doing mock scrapes in both. Maybe use some raw over in Wisconsin. What difference have you noticed? Any difference in like being able to use it over there versus here in Minnesota where you can't, and just your mock scrape kind of system?
Yeah, I think it just kicks in a new scrape a little bit quicker when you can add some scent. Otherwise, you're just starting from scratch, waiting for that first couple young bucks or button bucks or does to investigate and lay down some scent, and it starts to build. So just getting kind of a jump start with raw, when I'm over in Wisconsin, definitely just kickstarts those scrapes pretty well. But for the most part, how I got them set up, they're in the same spots every year. They're these community scrapes, so the deer already know about them. Typically, like there's one over there I set a camera up on about a week ago. the ground was already black, 5 foot wide scrape on the ground. So it's already pre-established. It's not a new spot. So I typically just focus on those yearly community scrapes and just freshen them up. More than anything, I'm not getting too wild because I have hunted the properties for several years, trying to change too much up from that standpoint. So, but raw definitely helps jumpstart a fresh scrape, which is unfortunate. We can't, use it here in Minnesota, but I think the visual, if you get ahead of it and you create a strong visual, get those deer using it in a sense, it's similar, to adding scent.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you can put something, whether it's even if it's not a scrape stick, if you would even just, put a post in the ground out in your food plot and, strap a tree or screw a tree limb to it. It's that visual that makes those deer. When it's in the middle of a field, it's like they can't help themselves. Well, not in the middle of a field, but on the edge, but just out 20 yards. It's like they can't help themselves. And that visual, even if you can't use scent, they're eventually going to use it. And then as they start using it, more will use it, then it just snowballs. And you mentioned something really good, and that's using the same areas, putting them in the same location. Well, that trains those deer, as they are 1.5-year-old bucks. And shoot, even button bucks, they'll come and work it and they smell that. Well, they keep coming back to it. So you're training those deer to come back and keep using that. And, that just kind of circulates through the whole season, whether it's pre-rut or rut, whether they're wanting to show that, their dominance level, or they're coming back to check it for hot does, because the does will hit it too. And you're just training them to come back in that same location, which enables you to capitalize.
Have you ever tested hemp ropes for scrapes, or are you mostly just a branch guy?
I've tested ropes too. And I like putting those, not that you can't figure out a way for the ropes, but I like putting something out like in the food plot or in that area where I hunt. I don't have as much timber. If I had more timber and I was hunting more in the timber or transition areas in the timber, then I would probably utilize, the rope more, because of the fact that it holds the scent the same. The only difference is that with the rope, they're not going to tear it up, with the branch. Like I'll start with a big long branch, especially the alfalfa where Sherry killed. Like I have to change it out a couple times a year because they'll start really long and then it just comes really short. But if it's 1 foot long, believe it or not, they will still hit it. They will continue to use that like they're eating it. And then once you just go there, replace it, and they'll go right back to it. It's crazy.
Is there a type of, I guess you're probably limited to what's in the area, but like type of tree limb that you're going to cut off? Some probably last longer, the softwood, hardwood, oak probably, we've heard that last longer when we're setting up some of the scrapes and stuff. Anything that cedar maybe?
Yeah, I've used cedar, I've used oak. I use oak a lot, but it depends on what's close. And if I find a tree that I know they like to use, like naturally do it, I'll use that. For whatever reason, it seems like that works better. You know what I mean? In my experience and what I've used, that if they already have one that they naturally work, then I'll use it. But shoot, they'll use black locust, at times it just kind of depends on where it's at and what's going on. But yeah, oak with the big leaves, they tend to last a little longer. The leaves last longer. I think it holds more scent. That's probably my preferred, that, or even cedar is a good one too.
How are you measuring the height of this? Is it, a straight horizontal branch, or you angle it down? Do you like a curve up?
I like it more horizontal because of the fact that as they break it back, it stays at that same angle. And I generally, for me, I'm not real tall, but I'm about, I put them about chest high for me. And, I've tried them at different angles. But if you get it too tall, they don't use it as much. You want it to be kind of easily for them and all deer at different age, structures to be able to utilize that. And even the does, you want it to be short enough that they can come up and, rub on it, and they'll utilize it just like the bucks. The bucks tend to more, but they'll definitely all do it. And the does will start using it just like a normal scrape. It gets close, they'll pee in it and everything.
Yeah, there's a couple we set up last year that started out really active, but then as the deer, because they were more of a downward looping branch, once those tips kind of got worked off from the taller deer, it was out of reach for any small deer, fawn and button buck, most does, and then it kind of goes dry. So yeah, I like the idea of being horizontal, shooting it out so then they can just kind of work it back. It seems like something, I'm just thinking of a couple spots I'm going to adjust and probably use that strategy and see how that works.
Yeah. And I mentioned scrape stick. There's different things you can utilize out there. You can make your own stuff. And I think scrape stick is now, I think they call it scrape fix. You can still get them. But what's cool about them is you can screw them to a 4x4 post. They are designed to use a T-post. You can put a T-post in the ground anywhere you want, and you can set it up to where that branch is facing you. And, it just puts that in a situation where you place it where you want. Or you can, like for pinhead, I actually mounted it to a tree. It comes with a strap. I just mounted it to a tree. And there's other trees in the area, but like I mounted that on that tree because of where the stand placement was, and just gave me the opportunity it would help me with the shot. Now, luckily I shot him. I mean, before he got to that, but essentially he was heading right to it.
Yeah, that's the beauty, is being able to just add one extra thing to put those deer where you want them.
That's it. Yeah. Because you might only visually see a shooter buck a handful of times a year. Some people never do. Some people once, twice a year. Maybe some see them all the time. But most people, I think you only have maybe 2 to 3 opportunities to shoot a mature buck a year, on a piece of ground. So you got to figure out how to capitalize on that, And every little thing you can do to put the odds in your favor, the better.
I want to kind of end this podcast and talk about an early season hunt that you had, and it's with a deer that you call Tiny Tim.
Yes.
And Tiny Tim is a deer that scored, 230?
230 and 4/8 gross.
An absolute monarch of a deer. That was early season. Tell me about the strategy on that deer and how that hunt kind of went down.
So during the summertime, I knew these deer were feeding in a bean field, and it's an area where I couldn't hunt, but where I could hunt, I could see the field. So I actually slipped in with my Quiet Cat. I set up with an Athlon spotting scope, and I filmed not only him, but another buck that I ended up shooting the last year, actually, 23. But I filmed both of them and was incredible. Well, again, that was a bean field that wasn't where I could hunt. So, and where he was bedding, he was transitioning there a lot. And I knew that people knew about him. And I felt pretty strong that if he made it to the weekend, this was opening week for us, that he was probably going to get killed by the neighbor. And, I'm primarily a bow hunter. Almost everything I've killed is with a bow. But I decided that I would rather put my hands around him than the neighbor. No matter what I did, I wanted to get him. So I had stands set up for different wind locations, and it just, in this scenario, it was absolutely the wrong wind for me to get down and dirty with him, and get close with a bow. So I thought at the time anyway. So I was looking at the wind, and I'm like, man, I got to do something. The wind forecast wasn't changing the whole week. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And finally I was like, I'm going to get, because there's a ridge right there. I'm going to take the muzzleloader. I'm going to ride the Quiet Cat in. I'm going to get up high because wind currents typically can change. If nothing else, maybe I'll blow over top of him. I'm going to have my raw. I'm going to use my phase. I'm going to use my ozonics. And I'm going to slip in there and I'm going to try to get where I can kill this deer. Because, again, if he made it through the weekend, I think the neighbors, they had a good opportunity, I can assure you. Maybe even through the week, because they live right there. So I came up with my game plan. I shot my gun, my muzzleloader, got it all dialed, made sure it was dialed still. And I went for it. And it was hot. But that deer, I knew he'd been going anyway. And I actually... there's a little channel right down on this before he gets to the gravel road. And like a few weeks prior to that, I'd put a trail camera right on that. And anyway, I went there that night, got ready, and I actually got closer than what I thought I'd be able to. I actually got within about 35 yards of that, But I didn't know that at the time. And it's one of those things where, you just can't gamble. Like, you got to make things happen. And so I set up, and I had a very, very narrow window that I could shoot in. So I'm sitting next to a big tree. I have my camera arm strapped to the tree. I've got my ozonics pointing. I've got everything sprayed. I've got my Quiet Cat where I wrote it in. I mean, I'm just ready to go. And my plan was I literally walked through how I was going to do everything. So I had my camera set up, pointing right there. I had my secondary camera angles ready to go. And all I had to do was hit one remote and it turn on. I had everything ready to go. And the plan was, as soon as I saw any movement through this little brushy area, anything, I automatically turn it on and pull around and get ready. Could be a doe, could be a young buck, I don't know. But if I didn't, I wouldn't have time to actually capture him and make the shot in that narrow window. Well, believe it or not, I saw movement. I did all that. And when I turned back around with the gun, I'm looking and I'm just kind of behind the gun, but I see, and it's him. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, So I cocked the gun, and I put it on him, stop him. He turns around and runs back the other way. And he only ran about 40 yards. I mean, I just, smoked him. But that little camera that I set down there captured all that. I didn't even know there was a young buck following behind him, but it was incredible, But it's one of those things where you have to be nimble, you have to be flexible. And when the opportunity presents itself, you got to do it, And yeah. If I had more ground there, or if he was going into a field where, I could hunt and nobody else could, or whatever the scenario, I would have waited and wanted to take him my muzzleloader. But in this scenario, I'm sure glad that I did. Yes. Now, and he's on Buckmaster scoring system, the BTR, he's the new #1 Kansas state record.
Wow.
For muzzleloader.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a giant. We were almost going to break that one down, and maybe we might need to do a little hunt breakdown. What I was going to say is, like you said, you got to act on that opportunity when it presents itself. Because I feel like we always kind of lull ourselves into like early season. We're getting these big bucks on camera. They're doing the same thing. Like, oh, this is going to be easy. They're just going to keep doing this. But it's at some point, things just flip, whether it's neighbors spook them, neighbors shoot them, beans turn. Something happens.
Good or bad.
And then it just flips and you lose out on all that. So it's like, kudos for going in and getting the job done quick, because you just never know, like, what day things are going to change.
I've seen in the past, and he's one of them. So the year before, I've killed some giant bucks, and but I'm not shy of, shooting anything that's mature. I mean, if things are right. And the year before, Tiny Tim was a 3-year-old, and the one I called Resurrection Man, he was a 4-year-old, but he needed another year at least. And this old 5-year-old typical 8-point, 135 inch. I can't remember exactly what it was, but just a old tight rack, heavy 5-year-old 8-point came in there and he ran those 2 deer off of there. So you don't know. I mean, they come hard horned. And so I ended up killing that buck because I'm like, man, I don't want them, because especially when you're talking a 3-year-old buck, I feel like they're volatile at that time, where that might not end up being their home range if they get pushed off. The other 2 tolerated each other, but that 5-year-old, man, he was just like running them out. So the crazy thing is, after I killed him, like a week later, both those bucks showed back up, and then they stayed there, and I ended up killing both of them, 22 and 23. That's
talk about the long game there. We always talk about, I feel like, talk about the strategy of like, oh, we're going to kill that bully buck, so then these other bucks come back in. We talk about that, and then, but like, that's full circle right there. Like, watch him run those other bucks off, kill them, and then in the following years, kill both those target bucks you wanted to kill. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It was incredible. And that's the other thing too, is you can't always shoot your best scoring bucks. I know we all want to, but the problem with that is then, if you're trying to manage it all, you, especially like a young buck that has great potential, then, you shoot him because he would score higher than a more mature buck. And then, the problem with that is then your more mature buck keeps breeding, and then it's just, you don't have that, character that's kind of going around. So you really kind of have to think about everything, and I mean, still, no matter what I've killed 2 bucks over 200 inches. I've killed a lot of great deer, but any buck that's mature, that's especially 5+, is special, even a 4-year-old, good 4-year-old, but, be proud of that, because if you can beat them, and especially, shoot them with a bow, that's pretty remarkable. And, I think too many times we do get caught up on inches, and it is awesome, but you kind of got to look at it all, and think about your long-term plan. And, if you can beat a mature buck and, kill him with a bow and then capture it on video, you've done something, no doubt.
To wrap this up, if you had one piece of advice to give to people listening, what would that one piece of advice be?
Can I feed you one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, during your hunt breakdowns, you said I'm hunting a lot less now than I did in the past and killing a lot more deer.
Yeah. I spend a lot more time planning and thinking and having all my gear ready, knowing what to expect, how my bow shoots, every little thing. Planning is probably a big piece, because I don't hunt as much. So I plan. So when I go out to the field, I'm going to kill. I'm not going to hunt. I'm going to kill. The hunting's already been done. The hunting is all season. It's, maybe years, as, if I learn a specific deer or whatever, find weak points, and yeah, I run a lot of trail cameras because I love it, but, I don't need the trail cameras. I mean, I hunted in Indiana when, we didn't even have trail cameras before they were even out, and, I would watch tracks and find big buck tracks and how they would transition and look for all kinds of stuff, even summer scouting. But just the whole deal is learn as much as you can, be completely prepared, reduce how much you impact on the animal, and then go in for the kill.
There you have it. Try using that in your arsenal this year. Exciting time of year. Donnie, thank you for coming up, being in the studio. Guys, look forward to his hunt breakdowns this fall. They're going to be wicked. Some epic footage, iconic deer, lots of good stuff coming. We appreciate you listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, click the like button. If you haven't done so already, check out the Deer Study app. Lots of good things. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll catch you soon.
The Deer Society podcast is brought to you by Illusion Hunting Systems, Onyx Hunt, Reveal Cellular Cameras, 10-point crossbows, Prime Archery, G5 broadheads, Osseo gear, raw frozen scents, and HHA.